let's get into, you tweeted something about the Saudis buying the ATP ranking system. And this is a follow-up. If you haven't listened to episode 2 of Serve, please go back and listen to last week's episode. A lot of the broader strokes of that show continue to be extremely relevant this week. We did a full kind of Saudi breakdown. What's the future hold? How do you take the money? What are the trade-offs? Yada, 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 a lot of the sensitivities. And we tried to be kind of sober to multiple points of view on that issue. But sure enough, as soon as we ended up recording it, 2 hours later, they announced King of the Court, where they're paying everyone $1 bajillion to come in and basically play a glorified EXO. And then you tweeted something about the ranking system yesterday. What's going on with that?
Yeah, I have a good sources telling me there's going to be a forthcoming announcement where the PIF, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, is going to be making this deal with the ATP and then presumably soon thereafter the WTA, where it's basically buying these levels of sponsorship, and one of them includes essentially buying the rights. I guess you could say buying the rankings. I mean, you said last week, and it's a good point. Numbers. What'd you say? No, information's free. I mean,
I'm trying to figure out like how you buy. I said, how do you buy math?
Yeah,
I guess the Saudis have figured out how to even buy math. I don't understand. It's a set algorithm, like it's a set ranking system. So it's basically just what every time we say the ATP rankings, we say the ATP PIF rankings. Like what does this look like?
Yeah, I mean, at some level, yeah, it's a sponsorship deal. It's Pepperstone. I'm not sure Pepperstone quite punched through. I'm not entirely sure what it is. They are the current sponsors of the ranking, but you can't have a tour without a ranking system. So I think this is more than just sponsorship. And I mean, this is either sort of right. This is how businesses invest. You do a little bit at a time, and they're upping their shares, or else this is sort of a clinic in sports washing. Nadal comes on as an ambassador. You hold an exhibition, then you hold a next gen event, then you hold a big boy event, and this is all sort of incremental. But yeah, apparently there will be a forthcoming announcement, maybe at Indian Wells, where we learn that this Saudi investment. This is going to be a real story in tennis, men's and women's, in 2024. But there is a big announcement coming, and part of it involves essentially taking over the rankings in addition to other sponsorship elements.
Yeah, I still don't really understand. Like the rankings have no IP. This is basically just to like get a friend. It's just like a nice little entry into tennis where you're all of a sudden partnering with the ATP, you're giving them some money, and then that opens it up to larger conversations. I mean, it's basically what the deal is, right? We're buying access.
You nailed it. And there are events, Miami and Madrid are the events you hear about that might just be for sale. Well, instead of just going in and making an offer, maybe you sort of worm your way in and you've got some signage and you've got this rankings deal. And I think this is all a calculated strategy to get into tennis. We can argue whether this is a good thing or bad thing, but it's clearly very calculated. And I think all this is in the shadow of Live Golf, which was basically like, God damn it, we're starting a rival tour. Let's try to throw buckets of money and roll up the brink trucks to Phil Mickelson. And Tiger doesn't want it. Fine, Phil Mickelson does great. That did not go well. This seems much more calculated and strategic.
Well, they're not trying to separate any current tour as of now. This, to me, the biggest sign is like, okay, we're buying the rankings. Like you're buying math. To me, the biggest show is that they want to work at least inside of the current structure. You don't go pay the ATP a bunch of money for something that has no IP. It's literally just math. Unless you want to further that conversation towards another event. I would assume it's obviously the ATP has no ownership over the slams as outside of kind of being a resource tour managers. So they're familiar faces. So it's not a completely foreign experience from the week to week of the actual tour. So this is basically just this is a starter course.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is this is your Class A stock, and then maybe you up your equity. This is very strategic.
And so they're doing this, and the difference is, they were going to blow up the golf universe and have succeeded in various times in ways, shapes, or form, where it's just basically we're going to go with the confuse and conquer method, and also we're going to make the runway so long with potential litigation that eventually we're going to have a conversation together. This seems like a more amicable way to get that conversation at first than threatening litigation to where Live, we have the resources, we can pay off our litigation longer. So therefore, why don't we just come to the table now as opposed to 3 or 4 years from now?
Exactly. I don't want to make this the
Okay.
Saudi tennis serve, but just keep in mind, big picture. This is all about image, perception, branding. I'm
Yeah.
not sure Live Golf did wonders for Saudi's image, so this is sort of a kindler, gentler way to embed in sports without having the clusterfuck we had in golf.
So I talked to, I had a friend of mine call me today. He's, one of the more successful agents in the last 25 years, likes the pod. We kind of talked through a little bit of this, and he said he was happy with me talking about it today. But a lot of the conflict and why Tylee's running around is because there is a lot of chatter, and I'm curious if you've heard much about it. It's rare that I actually get any news to you first. But that the fight with Tylee and the thing that's making him uneasy, and understandably so, is wanting to launch a Saudi event in that 0 week of January or that first week of January, which is brutal if you're Craig Tylee. He has built up the infrastructure of United Cup and a mixed team event coming in and replacing, kind of working with the ATP to kind of take a dig at Davis Cup, and value. Novak showed up for United Cup this year. All that kind of goes away. If Saudi takes that first week, then there's no other players that are going to go play the first week that can sell a ticket in a Brisbane, or a United Cup kind of goes up in flames. And so if you're Craig Tylee, you're obviously playing defense on that part of the schedule. That throws kind of everything for a loop at the beginning of the year. What are your thoughts on that? And is that what you're hearing?
That's exactly what I'm hearing. And that's sort of one of the reasons why he grudgingly held his nose and staged United Cup, which is not a money winner. This is the Aussie tennis summer. So you need some sort of run up, right? I mean, the US Open has the North American hardcourt circuit, Wimbledon has grass events, French Open has a number of clay events in Western Europe. What does Australia have? Well, if everyone spends the first 2 weeks of January making a ton of money at an event halfway across the world in Riyadh, that's not great for the Australian Open and Tennis Australia. So
No.
Craig Tylee's playing defense. Hey, listen, we're going to play nice here. You're going to let me keep my January, but I will be sure you get your event. Maybe we do it in February when there's Doha and Dubai. I mean, one thing that's interesting is if you're Doha and Dubai, you're like, look, I didn't know I could upgrade. I'll match. I have endless resources as well, and I've been a loyal ATP member for all these years. How come you're giving the Saudis the big event? I would have opened the suitcases myself. So putting this Saudi event after the Australian Open makes a lot of sense. It makes sense if you're Craig Tylee. I don't think the folks in Doha and Dubai would be particularly pleased by that. Man, we're really getting this is very in the weeds, but I do think this
Well,
is a
I
big
mean,
it's a big story, right?
it's a huge story. I mean, you're basically taking away a very valuable piece from someone who in tennis has generally been considered an innovator, peeks around the corners, has been a pretty good partner. Has expanded the Australian Open, has improved it nonstop, and then all of a sudden you're taking this and dangling this thing that would be devastating for the Aussie summer lead-in. But the other part of this, if I'm pitching the players and I'm like, this is a bad idea, and let me tell you why. Okay, because I could probably, pitch it. Listen, I could be on the other side of it and pitch it really well and just say, hey, money, who's against it? Like, if it's going to happen anyways, let's at least max out value while we have leverage. But what's the number one thing we hear consistently complained about for the last 30 years from the top players on tour, who are essentially your moneymakers, right? They're the ones selling night sessions. They're the ones, they are the most important figures in your game. What do we hear nonstop? If they could make one change, what would it be?
Schedule, schedule, schedule.
Schedule, schedule, schedule. So let's put this into a hypothetical, right? Either January, I don't know what the day, January 3rd, whatever the first Monday of January is for 2025. I don't know if it's a 10-day event, but leave it alone. Let's just call it a 1 week event for now. That's scheduled, and you can't miss a Masters 1000. So we, on the heels of Sinner's win in Australia, we're like, oh man, or Medvedev playing in the final. We're like, oh man, I was personally someone who liked getting a tournament in, like at least getting some tournament matches in before going into Australia, right? I didn't like kind of going in flying blind. So let's take a peek at this. Sinner plays through the first week of December for Davis Cup, which follows World Tour Finals, which is also kind of gotten later and later and later. When I played it, it was early November. Now it's late November. So everyone's kind of pinching it on all sides. This deal would make scheduling for the offseason an absolute nightmare for the top players. You're going to have to pull out of something. You cannot play till December 7th and then turn around and leave your home to go to another event on December 25th, which is the responsible date that you would have to leave. There is no time for training. There's going to be an uptick in injuries. You have to kind of set your body. And I want to get into kind of a macro conversation about how someone goes about scheduling. But this throws a schedule. This is a nightmare for especially people, the top players that end up playing another 3 weeks longer than the normal tour.
First, you said December 25th, which I think you're right, and I think that actually is the date that I know Nadal left for Australia on that date. I mean, how crazy is it? Not only is this sport nonstop and you're playing till 3 in the morning and it's an 11 and a half month season, but you're asking players to leave to start the next year on Christmas Day. I mean, just step back and we should ponder how absurd that is. And yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, you could say, well, we're going to charter jets and we're going to have those sweet, those Emirates flights with the apartments where you get a shower in your cabin. You know what? It's still
Okay, I can take a
travel.
shower in my cabin that doesn't change the
Exactly,
calendar.
or my jet lag.
Yeah,
Yeah. Does it sound more appealing to you to put that big Saudi event in February between Australia and Indian Wells? Does that sound more palatable to you?
none of it really sounds. I mean, then you're automatically eating the lunch of Rotterdam, Rio. I mean, you're basically, you don't put 1,000 in the middle of a jammed calendar where there's consensus that there are no weeks that are convenient for any growth,
Right.
right? Especially for the biggest events that are mandatory. You can throw in a 250 here, then it's a choice. Like you mentioned, Rafa leaving on the 25th of December, but also that's different. Listen, he hadn't played forever. He hadn't played since Australia the year before. Like, so he had been off the entire time, not as extreme as someone who kind of burned it to the end, the 8 singles players at World Tour finals. And then all of a sudden you're going to turn them around 3 weeks later and have a Masters 1000 to start the year? That's impossible. Like you can't. That is so incredibly short-sighted. So my player hat says, listen, yeah, let's at least be responsible. And also, if you are the ATP, and they've obviously said, oh, hey, listen, we're open for business because we've sold the ATP rankings. Like if your first foray into actual schedule making with this new entity that is, controversial, but more and more every week that passes feels inevitable. And our first kind of handshake to the tour is, listen, we're going to create a massive scheduling pain in the ass. Like I
Well,
think you're gonna. I think that's counterproductive. I know money is money, but also I think February is better. There's a lot of action. The women are going there this week. I know a lot have already left. Now you are getting into the, well, why isn't it us then? We've been partners in this part of the world with both tours for many years, and it sounds like you have a little bit of a bidding war, and it's going to get interesting because I think that will create some fireworks. I mean, it's a good position. There's certainly leverage, but if I'm Craig Tiley, I completely understand the defense of January leading into the
no,
Australian.
I don't think this is because Craig Tiley's thrilled to start cutting deals with the Saudis. I think this is a defensive maneuver. I keep thinking this is a great business school case study, right? It's all about
Yeah.
leverage and incentives and at what price. And again, what I heard from players is Craig Tiley essentially said 14 events, you're going to be playing these events anyway, and you could double or triple your income. And keep in mind, these are. I mean, you were in this role when you're 22 years old and you have an agent who's compensated in some level based on a percentage of your income. You're 22 years old and someone says, "Listen, same number of events you played last year, and you're going to make 3x." That might sound appealing, and you can power through your jet lag. But no, I mean, this is you and I've gone pretty granular here, but I do think scheduling is a huge issue, and I think this also kind of is a good window. This is a good glimpse into sort of the challenges that tennis has, and some of the challenges that institutionally the tours and the players themselves all have to confront.
Yeah, and just a quick example, and I won't spend much time on this at all. I organized a meeting in 2007 in Australia. There was some, upheaval about the schedule, and some players were publicly, coming out against the scheduling, and it seemed to be kind of a big deal. So I said, listen, I know this is a packed week. It was the Monday before Australia, the Wednesday before, or something like that, and so it wasn't the top 20 players, but it was the top 20. And it was just my opinion, but so I'm sure I messed some of it up. But most important people in the game. So rankings combined with markets, right? Like I remember one of the people in that room then was Peridon Shrishafan, he was massive in Thailand, right? In the first, huge in the Asian market. And so he needed to be in that room. I forget whether his ranking was top 20 or not in that. And then kind of all the usual suspects. And I said, okay, listen, we're complaining about schedule. This is X, Y, and Z. What has to happen? We don't like this. We don't like this. We don't like this. We don't like this. Some sacrifices are going to have to be made. I'll look at someone who, has success at the French Open. I said, are you willing to not play in the French Open? And then all our problems are solved. Well, I can't do that. Next person, would you be willing to, all the while knowing that the obvious place to cause a fuss would be the U.S. Open, because you need the 4 months afterward to negotiate anything that you want to do. You can't do that between the French Open and Wimbledon. But to make the point, there's been a bet in division with personal preferences for a while, and also with conflicts of interest, right? So the two biggest players in that room at that time were represented by the same agency, who also negotiate the TV rights for Wimbledon. So I'm going, okay, so they're out on some level, right? So like you're playing with kind of a fractured hand. You feel like you're playing a game of poker where you get to see one card. So, but these are kind of the inner layings of, it's not just as simple with, I'm going to make my first Twitter fingers reference for the week, was saying, well, they should just put it there. It doesn't work like that. There's a million different, balls in the court. No pun intended. Tennis humor is the best. But it is a nightmare.